Sharonda, and this is my podcast as well as my Facebook Live and YouTube channel, Spiritual Sense. Today is Monday, which is March the 11th. And so, in this podcast, I'll go over topics regarding the paranormal, occult, and supernatural. I also do what I reference to as spiritual readings, light and dark, which essentially is a tarot card reading. Okay. So I'd like to stress that this podcast, as well as this Facebook and YouTube channel, is for entertainment purposes, sometimes informational or even educational purposes. Okay. So these are my opinions. Okay. Um, so if you go on my podcast platform, which is on Spreaker.com, you will find a variety of topics that I have spoken on regarding the paranormal, occult, and supernatural. I do feel as though God has a way of communicating with us in times of adversities, disparities, troubles, when we're in the company of those who are not of our commonality, like mindedness, and not in agreement. So I'm going to title this topic Spiritual Language. And it's pretty much a recap of some of the things that I have said over the course of recording on my podcast. Okay. So I just briefly wrote some notes on here. So spiritual language, what is that? Well, what I mean by spiritual language is God has a way of conveying. I know the scripture says God is not a God of confusion. Okay. And I'm not going to argue the Bible. I'm not going to argue the scripture. I'm just going to give you my synopsis of that because I do feel as though everybody is not intended to have. You got the haves and the have-nots. I do believe that everybody journey in this life experience is not going to be a favorable one. I do believe that um, some things, your journey and mine's, may be totally different. And how things are going to be conveyed to you may be contrary to how they're conveyed to me, and vice versa, if that makes any sense. Okay. So I do believe that the origin of language or communication is such as that um, when you are in the company of those who seek to steal, kill, and destroy, and really don't have your best interests at heart, that God has a way, as mentioned, back in even slave times and the Atlantic slave trade or what have you, that many of the slaves, as told, spoke in such a way to where the slave masters was not able to understand what was being conveyed. So dialects and broken languages, sublet of languages is such as that. I honestly feel as though um, talking in code, I should have really labeled this spiritual code as opposed to spiritual language, but one and the same. So I think when you begin to gravitate to certain spirit related job fields or spiritual duties, it's your covering for when things have been revealed to you, if that makes any sense. So, such as like if someone has been in, have foreseen some things that are very traumatic, that is contrary to what the biblical text mentions, then I think God has a way of covering them to protect and shield them by way of communication styles, languages, dialects, as such. And I'll give you an example, Ebonics being one, which is like a broken language within a language, okay? Um, so I feel as though God does convey messages in a covert manner while we are in the company of those who are not in agreement with us, who is against us. Protection during hardships, disparities, particularly when there's hidden agendas or things that are unfavorable. I think that's with the origin of communication, language, and things of that sort. So, as I mentioned about, a couple of episodes, I mentioned about UFOs, which I do have a reference to my podcast episode as well as visual presentation where I mentioned about aliens and UFOs. Okay. We know of aliens. We know aliens to be these so-called gray or green or whatever color beings, and then oftentimes you hear them referring to something that's foreign, someone that's foreign as aliens. But the sensibility that I got is God's way of saying something without coming forthright and saying it. And what does that mean? So as an alien is being experimented on, you'll begin to see that you will be as an alien, particularly when you feel or you may have been exploited, if that makes any sense, by a spiritual entity or system. Also, I was going to bring up another point and I lost my track of time. Oh, so I was watching earlier about the mysteries of the museum, which is a program that comes on about different things in terms of the Loch Ness monster and Bigfoot and all these different things. And it became apparent to me that is God's way of saying something without coming forthright and saying it. The purpose of even the most pest, roach, ant, rat, all of these different animals and pests and things of that sort conveys a message without coming forthright and saying as such. So we as human beings, we as people are such as that. We are a walking message. And oftentimes the spirit will channel through us to be a message to someone, if that makes any sense. Oftentimes you may be guided. I mean, it's done effortlessly. As I mentioned before, everything is God and God is everything. And I think we are a vessel of what is to be conveyed oftentimes. And such as the different millions of species of animals that are here, what is the purpose of that? And it mentioned to me that because it is a language that is understood but not spoken, spiritual coding. These things are done by way of spirit. Even watching about Bigfoot, I used to laugh, back in my day. Why are they chasing behind some Bigfoot and all this other stuff? But I think it's God's way of giving a synopsis about curiosity because when you are someone that gravitates to the sciences as your spiritual duty or spirit related job field, it's because you are a curious person and God will let you in on how one thinks. And that's basically what it is. It manifests itself in the universe, and you begin to see how God does convey a message. It's a language that is understood about without being spoken. A skunk, a raccoon, a lamb, a rabbit, even all the different mystical figures and things of that sort. So he does have a way of relaying messages in a covert manner. Now I know the average person can say, "Oh, they're just thinking too deep. You need to go to life, da 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 da, this and that." But and in essence, it is thinking deep, but in all actuality, it is not because when you begin to pay attention, he will gear you towards certain things, and you will get an inner knowing about purpose, about um the beginnings, about possibly the endings in this life experience, because I feel as though life is such as that. It's an experience, it's a journey that we are on, and we all are spiritually connected. Um, Meaning, it may be for in a favorable sense or not. As I heard us saying earlier today or last night, I was watching a program, and I am a firm believer in this. The devil, quote unquote, cannot do anything without the authorization or the permission of God. Without his authorization. And me and myself have said that I feel as though that they're one in the same. It's a state of mind. It's a state of knowing and inner knowing, and the ability to gain insight about this life experience. It's one and the same. Now, I'm not going to argue with the next person about it because I can't argue the Bible. Again, I don't know half, 1/3, 1/10 of the Bible, and I really don't even profess to want to know. But what I do know, based on what God has presented to me, is that we are all spirits, some for favorable and some for unfavorable means. Okay. I do believe we all mostly have common sense, common knowledge, but wisdom and this spiritual awakening is far beyond common sense, common knowledge. I mean, it's words just can't explain it. It's just like, you know, it's like, wow. Kind of similar to what I mentioned when I referenced to the rapture. And I mentioned that the revelation that had came to me in terms of the rapture is when you begin to see things for what it truly is. And once the eyes has been opened to where you see the reality of what is being conveyed and how a lot of things were being told in a backward motion or in a coded motion, and once God lets you in on what is actually being said, it will begin to break off the spirit. It will. And I think when we gravitate to certain assignments or spiritual duties in this life experience, it's such as that. You know, hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I felt the need to want to put this out, this spiritual coding hashtag language is what I'm going to refer to this as. I do believe that God has a way of conveying certain things to us. Um, Particularly when we're in the company of those that are not of our favor. And to bring you some sense of solace, I also want to stress um, in terms of death, if you are someone who's fearful of dying or death and things of that sort, to bring you some sense of solace, God will restore you if you choose to want to know what number. I do feel as though he will convey that to you. But that is something you don't want it to go out here and telling people because they'll mark you and try to mark their intellect and make it happen a little sooner. It's the point. Okay? So I am going to conclude this episode. This is just a brief episode in reference to spiritual coding by way of spiritual language. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, or a topic for a future show, you are more than welcome to comment below. Please, no inappropriate questions, comments, or suggestions. These are simply my opinions. I can't argue the Bible with anybody. I can only go off of what these big brown eyes have experienced in these 45 plus, 44 plus, going on 45 years on this earth. So what you experience versus me may not be the same thing. Okay? So until then, you have a safe one.